In my last video, I developed a Q&A website for coders using Django. And as I mentioned in that video, I didn't use Vue or React or anything like that, just to keep it simple. Later though, I decided to add Vue.js on top of it instead of React. So in this video, I'm going to show you why I decided to make that particular choice, how I did it, and what I was able to accomplish using it. First of all, let me show you what my use case was. Basically, it's for the question page that shows the details of a question and the answers to that question. And I wanted to use Vue to add these upvote and downvote buttons for the question as well as each answer. What I used to have before is I used to have these upvote and downvote buttons for the question, but then every time someone would click it, it would refresh the whole page. And I think that was okay for the question because there's only one question per page. But I think it would be pretty annoying for the answers because if I wanted to say, upvote all of these answers, it would refresh, the whole page every time for each answer. It's not a very smooth experience, right? And the way I solved this particular problem using Vue is I first replaced these upvote and downvote buttons for the question, so it doesn't refresh the whole page. And then I replicated the same functionality to each answer. And that's when I needed to decide whether I wanted to use React, Vue, or something else. And so let me explain why I decided to go with Vue right here. Actually, for my previous project, I used React and Django together, and that kind of worked, but it was a huge pain to set everything up. So the approach I was using with React and Django is called page as a component. The idea of this approach is to replace only a portion of the website. For example, one page, one particular kind of page of your website with a React component. So in this case, I would replace just the question page with a React component, but nothing else. A different approach would be to replace this whole website with a single React component. And that approach is called a single page app. But I didn't go with that because page as a component, replacing only one page with a React component is slightly simpler. So that was the approach I was using. But even with that approach, it was way too complicated. Definitely a lot more complex than using Vue. And the reason why React is more complicated is because with React, you would need to use a lot of other things. For example, you would need to set up a Node.js server that's separate from your Django server, and then you would need to use libraries like Babel and Webpack. So there are a lot of other things that you would need to learn to use other than React. But with Vue, it's much simpler to set it up, as you'll see in a second. So let me show you how to go about setting it up with Django. Here, just for a demo, I created a new page called test. It's at the local server's URL/test. This is my local Django server. And it just says, hello. It's a simple page. And it's actually already running a Vue app on top of Django. So let me show you how I set it up. The first thing I did is I created this new view called test view in Django. And this is invoked when that URL is called by a user. And this test view is going to retrieve the current user, and then it's going to render my new template called test.html using this context. This context contains the username of the current user as well as the current user object itself, so that this template test.html has access to those two variables. So now let's take a look at the template that I just mentioned, test.html. It has two simple components, three if you want to count everything. So let me explain those. The first one is we need to import the Vue library, which is done in this simple statements. But it's actually done in the head part of the HTML. So we can just comment this out because we don't have to import it twice. And the second part is the main div that we're going to use that's associated with our Vue instance. And the third part is the script. where the Vue instance is defined. So let me explain the script part first. In this script section, as I said, a new Vue instance is defined, and it's assigned to a variable called app. And in this part of the code, there are a couple of things that are defined. The first one is delimiters. So usually we don't need to define delimiters explicitly, but here we need to, because the default delimiters of Vue are the same as the default delimiters of Django, which are double square brackets or double curly brackets. So we need to use something else for Vue, and that's why we're using double square brackets here instead of double curly brackets. And this is what tells Vue which things are Vue variables. So for example, here in my HTML, we're saying this thing message is a Vue variable. It's not a regular HTML thing. And when Vue sees this, it looks for this variable in the data attribute of this Vue instance. So here I'm saying the data of this Vue instance is just one called message, and its value is hello. Another thing that we need to define here is this L, which I think stands for element. This is the element that corresponds to this Vue instance. And this is the ID app, and that refers to this div element right here. So just to recap, we have a new div element here with the ID app, and that's associated with this new Vue instance that we just defined with the delimiters double square brackets. And when Vue sees this thing, or when your browser sees this part with Vue, it says, okay, what should this variable be? And it looks for it in this data section here, and it says, okay, that's hello. So this part message is going to be replaced with hello. And that's why when we go to /test, that's exactly what we see, hello. Now, I explained a lot of things here, but I think the key point here is that it's much simpler to set up a Vue with Django than to set up React with Django. Here all I needed to do is I needed to import Vue with a single line, and then set up a new Vue instance and set up a single div element with a particular ID. And that's it. And I have a Vue app here. I don't need to use any other libraries like a Node.js server or Babel Webpack. So it's definitely simpler than React, I would say. Anyway, if you want to use a Django variable within this Vue app, that's pretty simple too. The simplest way to do it, it might not be the correct way to do it, would be to, in this message, for example, I can just write double curly brackets, username. So what happens with this script is when Django sees this template, it's gonna replace this part, username, with the actual current username. And then when this is sent to the browser, this is going to be hello username, whatever the username is. And then this part, message, is going to be replaced with that particular string. So if my username is, let's say, YKDojo, I should see hello YKDojo here. So again, Django will replace this username with YKDojo, and then this string becomes hello YKDojo, and that is going to be right here, hello YKDojo. And if I save this file and go to that URL, that's what I should see right here, and that's exactly what I see. Right now I'm logged in as YKDojo2, as you can see right here, so I see hello YKDojo2. Now this approach technically works but I would say it's a little bit hacky because I'm mixing Django's template language with JavaScript. So a more clean way of doing it would be something like this. I'm gonna use this Django statements. This says take the Django variable username and then make it available to the HTML and to JavaScript by putting it in an element called username. So this way we can make this Django variable available to JavaScript. And we can retrieve it in JavaScript with this little thing right here. Let me paste it here and let me explain it here. So this JavaScript statement says get this element that contains this variable username with document.getElementById, and then get what's inside it and parse it so that it's available in this new JavaScript variable username. So this way, it's a little bit cleaner because we're separating Django templating with JavaScript. And now, instead of using a Django variable here directly, we can use the JavaScript variable instead, which I think is cleaner, like that. Hello plus username plus, let's say, an exclamation mark. So this way we should see the same thing because we're supplying the Django username variable to JavaScript and we're retrieving it into a JavaScript variable, and then we're putting it here into the message, which is part of the Vue app here. And so when this gets loaded, that's what we should see. Hello username exclamation mark. So let's make sure that works by going to the same URL and refreshing it. Yeah, that's what we see. Hello username. Now this is the first basic step for setting up Django and Vue together. But if you want to create your own full stack app using this tech stack, this is not quite enough. So let me try to explain those quickly. The first thing is this statement that we saw earlier doesn't always automatically work. So it works for simple variables like this username, which is a string. But if we had a more complex object, for example, the current user that we were passing from our Django view, it doesn't always work. So I got this error: object of type user is not JSON serializable. What that means is that Django provides us with a default serializer that serializes this given object into a JSON object that can be used within JavaScript. But this default serializer doesn't always work. So what you'll need to do instead is you'll need to set up your own custom serializer using Django REST Framework's serializer library. And I don't have time to explain that right now, so I'm going to put all the relevant links in the description so that you'll be able to look into how to do that. You can look at my code as an example about how to do that too. And that's what I used to serialize each answer object that's sent to my Vue app too, so that my Vue app will be able to use each answer object as if that's a JavaScript object. Now the second thing is, what if you wanted to send some data from Vue to Django, not just from Django to Vue? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to define a method in your Vue instance, kind of like this, methods, and then you can define the name and the function. So let's call it vote. So let's just say this is going to be a function that's going to be called when one of the vote buttons is clicked. For now, I'm just going to create a simple function that's going to say alert, the vote function is invoked. And then what you want to do is you want to use this special attribute, v on click. I think this is the right syntax. And then just say vote. So this says when this element is clicked, this method should be invoked. Let's make sure it works so far by clicking it. And it works. Whenever this element is clicked, that function is invoked. And to send data or to send a request from Vue to Django, what you want to do is you want to use this library called Axios, which is recommended by Vue itself. And this library, you can use it to send an AJAX request to the Django server with some data from the Vue app. So for example, in this function, you can just say, use the Axios library to send a post request using an AJAX request to Django server to either upvote or downvote or cancel that vote. And when the Django server handles that request and says, okay, that vote was accepted, some kind of response is returned to the Vue app. And within the Vue app, within this function, you can handle that request. So with my particular app, let me show you how that works quickly. When I upvote, let's say this answer right here, that request is sent to the Django server. When that is successful, I can change the color of this upvote button within Vue. Okay, so all of this is pretty technical. You might say, is it really worth the effort? And I would say in this particular case, it definitely was. So let me explain why. There is one more sort of feature that I implemented, related to this voting function, and that is the point system. So how that works is whenever you answer someone's question and someone else upvotes your answer, you get 1 point. Every time someone upvotes your answer. And that point is shown right here with your username. And this is my points. And this is shown in the leaderboard too. So whoever answers most amount of questions and gets most amount of points is shown here. And I found that it's actually pretty motivating. I say this because as soon as I implemented this leaderboard and point functions, I noticed that people started answering questions more. So for example, right now, most of these questions at the top page have already been answered at least once. And it seems like, this leaderboard and the point system is a big part of it. It might, seem a little bit silly, but it's pretty motivating, I find, for other users and for myself too. And people sometimes even, talk about it and say stuff like, how can I get a point? And by the way, the answer to that question is you just need to answer somebody else's question, and then somebody else will need to upvote your answer. So those are the main features that I worked on these past few weeks. But there are a few other things that I added. The one big one is the search function, to search for questions. I thought about different alternatives for implementing this one. Should I use Django's search function or maybe a third-party search library? But I decided to go with Google's custom search function, I guess, because it's the simplest way to implement it and it's free for me. It's not perfect, but I think it's good enough for now. So if you search for example, Django, it's going to show all the questions that are related to Django. Again, it's not perfect. It shows like an ad from Google, and that's not ideal, but I think it's good enough for now. And I wanted to have a search function as soon as possible, and that's why I decided to go with this approach. And if you try using this website, and if you have bug reports or feature requests or anything like that, you can just go to the source code of this page. You can submit a new issue right here on GitHub, and I'll see what I can do about that. Okay, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. Sorry for the delay from the last video, but I'm hoping to, make more progress either on this project or maybe start a new project entirely and talk about it on this channel. Anyway, thank you as always for watching my videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.